In the pulsating heart of the metropolis, where stories intertwine and vanish among the myriad lights of the city, Valeria, a young and enterprising journalist, received an assignment that would forever change her career, and perhaps her very existence. Her editor had given her a challenging yet fascinating task to conduct a thorough investigation into the living conditions inside the city's renowned psychiatric institution, a place shrouded in mystery and marked by tales of pain and neglect. Armed with a notebook, voice recorder, and unwavering determination, Valeria crossed the threshold of the institution with the intent to give voice to those who were too often forgotten by the outside world. She was granted limited and strictly monitored access, but Valeria knew that to capture the true essence of the place, she would have to push beyond the boundaries set by the management. Taking advantage of moments when the staff was distracted, and with the discretion that only true passion for journalism can teach, she began to secretly interview some of the patients. Their stories were fragments of broken lives, shattered dreams, and cries for help muffled by silence. Valeria listened, recorded, and with every word, felt a mix of anger and compassion growing with her. It was during one of these clandestine meetings that Valeria first heard the name Lucas. "Be careful with Lucas," a patient whispered to her with a look that oscillated between fear and madness. "He's not like us, but here he shouldn't be." Intrigued and somehow drawn to this mysterious figure, Valeria decided she had to meet him, to understand his story, to unveil the veil of mystery that seemed to envelop him. It wasn't long before their paths crossed. Lucas was a young man with a neat appearance, with an intensely lucid gaze that seemed out of place in such a setting. Talking to him, Valeria uncovered the heartbreaking truth. Lucas was there voluntarily, pretending to be a patient to stay close to his mother, who was also admitted to the institution. His was a sick devotion, a morbid attachment that led him to give up his own life, not to abandon his maternal figure. In moments of clarity, Lucas opened up to Valeria, talking about himself and his mother with disarming frankness. The journalist couldn't help but feel empathy for him, seeing in Lucas not just the subject of an article, but a person deeply wounded by life. However, the shadows quickly thickened. Without warning, Lucas switched from a calm conversation to a state of violent aggression, a radical change that made Valeria suspect he suffered from a dual personality disorder. In one of these episodes, Lucas tried to harm her, convinced at that moment that Valeria was a threat to him and his mother. Valeria, thanks to her courage and quick thinking, managed to escape Lucas's grasp and flee the institution, taking with her the recordings of their conversations and a story that would shake public opinion. Back at the editorial office, she told everything to her editor, and together they decided to report Lucas to the authorities. However, when the officers began to investigate, they discovered that, according to the institution's records, Lucas had died about 2 years prior. No one with that name had been admitted to the institution since then. This revelation plunged Valeria into an abyss of doubts and questions. Had she really spoken with Lucas? Or, as the officer suggested, had her time spent in the institution begun to influence her perception of reality? Valeria's article on the conditions within the psychiatric institution caused a sensation, but the story of Lucas remained an unresolved mystery, an enigma that continued to haunt her. Had she encountered a ghost, a lost soul wandering the halls of the institution, or had she been a victim of her own mind, deceived by the echo of forgotten stories? On a stormy night, two figures stealthily moved through the woods surrounding the old Coldwater Asylum, an isolated facility notorious for its questionable practices and dangerous patients. These two escapees, Leo and Marco, were not just merely patients seeking freedom, but twisted minds determined to escape not just the asylum's walls, but also their past identities. Once outside, taking advantage of the darkness and the chaos caused by a sudden power outage within the institution, Leo and Marco crossed paths with a couple camping near the woods. With macabre cunning and cold violence, they overpowered the couple, eliminating them to assume their identities. Leo became Daniel, and Marco transformed into Thomas, using the unfortunate couple's documents and possessions to start a new life from the past that haunted them. But freedom and anonymity did not quell their darkest intents. Leo and Marco, now Daniel and Thomas, used their new identities not just to hide from those who might recognize them, but also to weave a web of deception and violence. They moved to a small town, where they began to construct a facade of normalcy, working by day and frequenting local spots by night, earning the trust and affection of the unsuspecting townsfolk. However, beneath this mask of everyday life, the two secretly plotted, planning acts of wickedness that reflected the distorted fantasies that had landed them in Coldwater Asylum. They began to manipulate the townspeople, sowing discord and suspicion, reveling in the power their anonymity and new identity gave them. The situation escalated when a series of mysterious events began to disturb the community. Petty thefts, anonymous threatening letters, and finally, a brutal murder that shook the town to its core. The local police, already overwhelmed, began to investigate, but Leo and Marco were always a step ahead, skillfully covering their tracks and manipulating evidence to frame innocence. Tension reached its peak when a young investigator, Sophia, began to connect the dots, noting inconsistencies in Daniel and Thomas's stories, and the strange coincidence of their arrival in town with the onset of nefarious events. Sophia, with her innate curiosity and analytical spirit, had started to notice small details that didn't add up about Daniel and Thomas. Despite the two having quickly integrated into the Willow Creek community, some aspects of their stories seemed forced, as if they had been crafted to fit the context. Sophia, having access to police files and national databases through her role as an investigator, decided to dig deeper. The breakthrough came when Sophia managed to track down an old photo from several years ago, showing Leo and Marco together in a context that left no doubt about their previous identities. It was a mugshot from the archives of an asylum located hundreds of miles from Willow Creek. The coincidence of their arrival in town with the start of a series of nefarious events could not be ignored. Determined to get answers, Sophia began to monitor Daniel and Thomas's movements, gathering evidence and documenting every suspicious act. She noticed that both showed a morbid interest in isolated places and the homes of some elderly and vulnerable members of the community. However, their presence in town was marked by a series of minor crimes and mysterious incidents that had gradually increased tension among the residents. Sophia decided to confront them directly, arranging a casual encounter in a public place. During the conversation, she made subtle references to information that only Leo and Marco could have known, closely observing their reactions. As suspected, for a moment, Daniel's, Leo's cunning faltered, revealing a glimmer of recognition, quickly smothered by a sudden emotional breakdown. It was that brief exchange of looks that confirmed Sophia's suspicions. With the evidence collected and the growing awareness of the danger the two posed to the community, Sophia approached the local police chief, presenting a detailed case against Daniel and Thomas. The police, initially skeptical, were forced to consider their stance when Sophia revealed the mugshot and outlined the connection between the mysterious events and the arrival of the two in town. The night before the planned operation to capture the fugitives, Sophia felt restless. She had a strong feeling that Daniel and Thomas had sensed they were discovered and might attempt something extreme to escape capture. Her intuition proved correct when, in the early hours, a fire broke out in one of the houses the two had frequented. It was clear this was a diversion, a desperate attempt to create chaos and buy time to flee. Sophia and the police split up, some addressing the fire, while others, led by Sophia, pursued Daniel and Thomas. The chase turned into a tight pursuit through the deserted streets of Willow Creek, culminating into a confrontation at the old abandoned mill outside town. Here, surrounded and with no escape routes, Daniel and Thomas were finally captured. During the interrogation, the true identities of Leo and Marco were revealed, along with the nature of their crimes. The Willow Creek community was shocked to learn the truth, but also grateful for Sophia's cunning and courage, which had thwarted the evil plans of the two and restored peace to the small town. In the desolate expanses of rural America, the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum seemed like a shadow from a bygone era, a colossal structure where the echoes of forgotten souls whispered through its dilapidated halls. Ethan Carter, a psychiatrist brimming with fervor and unwavering idealism, entered the gates of Trans-Allegheny with the hope of instigating positive change. He was equipped with the most advanced therapeutic techniques and a profound empathy for those under his care. Yet, the enigmatic aura and antiquated methodologies of the asylum soon began to undermine his convictions. The initial weeks of his tenure unveiled unsettling anomalies, inexplicably locked doors, evasive glances from the staff, and a pervasive silence that quashed any probing inquiry. An air of unease permeated the environment, stoked by whispered accounts of patients who spoke of restless nights and the silent, shadowy figures that roamed the asylum's vast, chilly corridors. Ethan's pivotal discovery came unexpectedly when he stumbled upon a collection of aged audio tapes labeled Confessions, hidden away in a neglected section of the asylum's library. Driven by curiosity and a sense of obligation, he delved into these auditory archives despite a looming apprehension about their contents. The tapes revealed the voice of a former patient, Jacob, whose calm yet despair-laden narration detailed the atrocities witnessed and endured within Trans-Allegheny's walls. Jacob recounted experiences of merciless treatments masquerading as therapeutic interventions, of solitary confinement that shattered even the most resilient wills, and of unsanctioned experiments conducted under the guise of scientific advancement, which were, in truth, acts of barbarism. He depicted a chilling scenario where patients, stripped of dignity and reduced to mere objects, were exploited by a corrupt system for personal enrichment and perverse research endeavors. Confronted with these harrowing truths, Ethan stood at a moral crossroads: remain silent and complicit in a decayed system, or take a stand to unveil the truth, risking his career and potentially his life in the process. His decision was swift, utilizing Jacob's confessions as a cornerstone. Ethan embarked on a rigorous investigation, documenting every instance of mistreatment, every unethical procedure, and gathering testimonies from a few patients and staff members brave enough to speak out. The quest for justice proved to be daunting. Ethan encountered resistance at every turn, from the asylum's administration, who sought to discredit him and intimidate him into silence, to local authorities hesitant to challenge an institution deeply ingrained in the community's fabric for decades. Amidst the struggle for transparency and justice, Ethan Carter mysteriously vanished. The news of his disappearance spread quickly, igniting a storm of speculation and concern. Ethan's sister, Ava, a determined young attorney, took up the mantle of finding her brother, driven by the belief that uncovering the truth was the only path to peace. Ava delved into Ethan's recent past, visiting Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum and interrogating its staff, patients, and local officials. Each interaction seemed to shroud Ethan's disappearance in deeper mystery. Staff members insisted that Ethan had voluntarily left his position, disappearing from the institution without a trace or explanation. This narrative starkly contradicted the passionate dedication that had always motivated Ethan. During her investigation, Ava was approached by a patient only known as the Witness, who shared a tale as horrifying as it was unbelievable. He claimed to have seen Ethan incapacitated and dragged into a secret section of the asylum, an abandoned wing rumored to be the site of inhumane experiments and tortures on those who threatened the institution's darkest secrets. According to the Witness, Ethan had been subjected to severe torment before meeting an unknown, possibly tragic fate. Faced with a critical decision, Ava wrestled with whether to trust the account of a patient plagued by severe mental illness. Skepticism was a luxury she couldn't afford, yet her legal background compelled her to seek tangible evidence before drawing any conclusions. Ethan's disappearance evolved into a high-profile case, drawing media attention and spawning theories ranging from forced flight due to threats to the chilling possibility of Ethan becoming a victim of the very horrors he sought to expose. Ava found herself navigating a sea of uncertainty, clinging to the few certainties she had. Over time, Ethan's search became a broader crusade for truth, drawing in human rights activists and families of other missing individuals, transforming Ethan's disappearance into a symbol of resistance against the systematic corruption and neglect pervasive in the mental health care system. Despite the daunting challenges, Ava's resolve only strengthened, fueled by the hope of someday uncovering what truly happened to her brother.